Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and listeners of the Lined Podcast. This is our recording for the week of March 15th, 2024. Today, we are going to be discussing persons with a vagina, also known as half the population of Canada. We're going to be talking about Toronto police, and we're going to be discussing an exciting new entry into the Alberta NDP race, someone by the name of Mr. Naheed Nenshi. That's it for this week at the Line Podcast.
Well, I just want to mention that I immediately screwed up the first attempt at this podcast because when you mentioned March 15th, I started making stabbing gestures.
Which could also have been very mistaken for another kind of gesture, so I was very confused.
You at the time were talking about people with a vagina, and I was making gestures that I understood to be stabbing gestures because it's the Ides of March. You misunderstood that. So we redid that because that was sending confusing messages to our the listeners never would have known. The viewers,
well, take it up with our HR department, Matt.
Yeah, I even had scissors. Like I thought the scissors, Ides of March, stab. I thought that was going to be obvious.
No,
but me going like this on the screen was.
No, that was giving me a very different kind of vibe, and it was a little menacing. Not going to lie.
My bad. Do you want to talk about our friends in Calgary, though?
Well, firstly, we're going to have a quick discussion because we are going to need lots of friends in Calgary. Last week, we announced that we are going to be doing a live taping of this podcast in Calgary on April 19th at the Plaza Theatre in Kensington. If you are in Calgary and would like to attend, we're going to put a link to that event right underneath the description box below. Mm-hmm. So please click through and purchase a ticket. We're just doing straight cost recovery on this one. The tickets are about $20 a pop to cover the cost of the venue. If you are a paid subscriber, check out this week's paid subscriber dispatch because we will also be having a paid subscriber only meet and greet after the podcast recording. Matt's coming into town. We're going to have some nachos. It's going to be lots of fun. Oh, and also a special thank you to our friends and lawyers who are helping us to sponsor this event. Specifically, I'm going to point out to DS Lawyers Canada LLP. They are our lawyers here at the Line, and we love their services. They're Calgary-based, I believe, although I do think they have other offices in other parts of the country, and they're throwing us some sponsorship cash to help support this event. So thank you to them. We'll also include a link to them underneath the description box below. But again, the other one thing I'll say is if you do want to come to this podcast event, please pick up your tickets really quick because we only announced this less than a week ago and we're more than half sold out of tickets. So we've got about 140 tickets for the event. We are actually selling out pretty quickly. So if you do want to come, please do consider buying it sooner rather than later because I don't think we're going to have extra tickets kicking around on this one.
So here, let's talk about on the podcast, and we should talk about off this. Are we going to treat this as our weekly podcast, or are we going to treat it as like a special episode? What do you want to do?
Oh, this is just our weekly podcast.
Okay. I don't mean this one. I mean the one we do in Calgary.
Oh yeah, just a regular. This is going to be our regular weekly podcast. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, speaking of regular weekly podcast, while I do not make easily confused stabbing gestures, would you like to explain people with a vagina to me? Because I'm going to be honest. I want the listeners to know this. I want the viewers to know this, and I've already told you this. This week have been buried under something I'm working on, and I have only barely been able to like pop my head up for air occasionally. And on one of those sort of like whale breaching the surface moments, like, you know, like me, the majestic aquatic creature that I am, like I breached the surface of the ocean and I was soaring through the air and all I heard was people with vaginas. And then boom, I hit the ocean again and I was back under, and I'm below the waves of my various tasks. And I'm thinking, do I want to spend a single moment figuring out what that was?
What a person with a vagina is, Matt?
And I just went, you know what? No. I am not going to spend a single moment figuring out why, like, in one of the 3 spare minutes I had this week to glance at, like, news headlines, people with a vagina was everywhere.
Well, that's fine, Matt, because you know what? I'll just take over all of the emotional labor for this podcast. I'm a
majestic ocean creature, Jen.
Yeah, and I just spent 3 hours driving back in from Edmonton because I did a thing in Edmonton yesterday. So not only do I not have makeup on and I'm living off of the donut mill food, but also I'm mildly hungover and I look like trash. It's not going to be my shiniest moment. But people with a vagina something that is, I think it's taking off among the culture warriors because it's, of course, a fairly evocative term that was used by our Supreme Court. This drama seems to have started on. Oh, here I'm just pulling up the date right now. Oh gosh, National Post, your website's dreadful. March 13th. Okay, so this was about 2 days
2 days
ago
ago.
from the day that this was published. Our good friend of the line, Tristan Hopper, published his daily column about things that's just popping up in the news, and he came across this particular paragraph in a recent Supreme Court uh, case involving a woman who a rape conviction that had been appealed and then overturned an appeal, and then I believe the Supreme Court reinstated the conviction against the gentleman involved in the sexual assault. And one of the paragraphs in this case reads as follows: where a person with a vagina testifies credibly and with certainty that they felt penile vaginal penetration, a trial judge must be entitled to conclude that they are unlikely to be mistaken. While the choice of the trial judge to use the word "a woman" may have been unfortunate and engendered confusion, in context it is clear the judge was reasoning that it was extremely unlikely that the complainant would be mistaken about the feeling of penile vaginal penetration, because people generally, even if intoxicated, are not mistaken about that sensation. In other words, the judge's conclusion was grounded in his assessment of the complainant's testimony. The Court of Appeal erred in finding otherwise. Matt, what is your plain understanding of what I just read to you?
Well, twofold. First of all, judges have weirder jobs than I appreciate. That that if a woman is vaginally penetrated, there will be no confusing that physical sensation with something else.
Okay. What a lot of people really cottoned onto in that statement was the phrase "people with a vagina," because, of course, in the current absurdly overloaded culture war environment that we're in,
Yeah,
what they're reading from that sentence is that the judge was unwilling or unable to use the word "woman."
woman.
And
Yeah,
not only that, but the Supreme Court judge in this case, justice in this case, was criticizing the trial judge for using the term "a women" because they believed that to be unfortunate and engendering confusion. So, of course, the usual people are kind of popping off about this. Now, I think that somebody could read that paragraph and actually have reason to be concerned. However, if you actually read the ruling in full, you start to come away with the fact that maybe the interpretation of some of the culture warriors on this is not quite correct. Because the actual Supreme Court reading in full uses the word "woman" multiple times. It's not like they're refusing to use the word. I think it more than 40 times they use the word "woman." There's no attempt to confuse someone about the nature of whom we're talking about, women. This appeal had to do with a fairly arcane bit of law about not using overgeneralizations about the human experience in order to convict people. And my understanding is that paragraph taken out of context isn't quite clear, because essentially what the judge is saying is that this woman this woman who was complaining was very unlikely to be mistaken about the feeling of penetration. And the trial judge, so in other words, the trial judge, by using the word "a woman," overly gave the impression of overly generalizing, when in fact, really what she was trying to communicate was that this woman was very unlikely to misunderstand this feeling or this sensation. So the use of "a person with a vagina" in this one paragraph was confusing, and not a reasonable person reading this paragraph alone could come to the wrong impression about what the judge was trying to convey in that paragraph. It's not a well-written paragraph, but this was not an attempt by a Supreme Court justice to stop using the word "woman" to describe people with vaginas. However,
can I stop and try to just read this back to you, and then
okay,
tell me if I've got it then?
okay.
A Supreme Court ruling about a rape conviction that hinged on the testimony of a woman who alleged that she was penetrated against her will, and that the judge had to analyze a ruling about whether or not she was able to to feel that and understand what she was feeling.
Or whether or not a woman or this woman would be
Right.
generalizing, would generally be competent to make that assessment.
And then the Supreme Court ruling had to look at the wording of a lower court level ruling, and then while doing so, use the term a person with a vagina, not to avoid using the term woman, but to criticize the grammatical structure of a lower court ruling or the word choice usage of a
Yeah, I
lower court
think, yeah,
ruling.
essentially, yeah.
See,
So this, so
this is
you
why I
could,
like to just hang out under the ocean with my fellow majestic sea creatures.
and also I've tried reading this court ruling. It's not a very well written ruling. It's not clear to me what the judge is trying to say. It's poorly written.
The
So
Supreme Court ruling or the one that got overturned?
the Supreme Court ruling is not well written. It's not clear and
Well,
concise,
that's
and
suboptimal.
it's pretty confusing. And I think that a good faith person reading this could be confused. So I don't give Tristan too much shit for this, because if you take this paragraph out of context, you could come to the exact same conclusion that he did about it. And even when you try to read this ruling in context, it's not super clear. So I have some issues with the way that this was written, and I also would point out that the fact that so many people have immediately jumped on this, I would say, is highly indicative of the lack of trust that people have in the courts to be commonsensical about these sorts of things. There's an assumption
Fair.
that the Supreme Court is ideologically captured and woke as a fuck, and as a result, when they see something like this, they immediately jump to the, "Oh, what do you mean you're not using the word woman now?" I think that is a problem for the court, and I think it's a problem for the court when you compound it with a poorly written judgment.
Do you know that GIF of the? It's funny. It makes the round all the time on social media. It's a woman who drinks something and is going through exaggerated facial expressions as she tries to figure out whether or not she likes what she just had.
Oh yes, it's that meme. That one meme where she takes I think it's kombucha, and she
She
goes,
goes, mm, mm, mm,
and then go,
mm,
mm,
mm.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
see, that's
Yeah,
kind of how
that's right.
I was reacting to what you were just saying there. Because for a
Yeah.
second, I thought you were going to say you can understand why the culture warriors jumped to a conclusion, but then you actually went to somewhere more reasonable and you said you understand why people are skeptical of the courts. And that I
Yeah,
agree
that's
with.
right. Yeah.
I give absolutely zero benefit of the doubt to culture warriors because they will find anything to be angry about. That's what they do. And something I have told a buddy of mine, you know me, I'm a Trekkie, and I said your sensors are turned up so high you're recording false positives, like you're
Yeah.
seeing stuff that isn't there,
Yeah.
and that's what culture warriors do. They need something that day, either for purely grifty, we need something to make a meme about and then tweet it and then raise money, or because they've kind of become emotionally addicted to outrage.
Hmm.
They need something to be fired up on every day. So one of my concerns with culture wars is that they're self-sustaining. Like most wars, there is some incentive, and I mean like literal wars right down to interpersonal conflict. There's usually an incentive to stop.
Hmm.
Culture wars, no. Every incentive is to keep that fucker going.
Hmm.
So whenever I hear stuff like this, as I'm like breaching the surface to like suck through my blowhole and then fill my massive lungs before returning to the soothing ocean depths, I think culture wars can be ignored 95% of the time because 95% of it's manufactured outrage just to sustain that day's cycle. But my job, your job, the job of other people in our line of work is to have an open mind that occasionally the culture warriors are right.
Hmm.
There are outrageous things they get picked up on. And I don't mean to rush you through this topic, Jen, but the one I'm going to talk about next, I actually think is an example of that.
Okay,
So,
so your outrage is valid.
um, I think what I will do is I try to look at everything. I didn't have time for people with a vagina this week, but in general, I try to spend 2 minutes figuring out, is this real or is this bullshit? And for the one I'll talk about in a few minutes, I put in my due diligence on that one. And I was actually shocked to find that, I'll explain later, but sometimes this stuff's manufactured, sometimes it's bullshit. Do you think people with a vagina is real or do you think it's bullshit?
I think that this one is bullshit. However, I can understand. It says to me that something about the credibility that the court has among a lot of people, that so many are rushing to the most extreme. This bullshit court is woke. conclusion so quickly. And I think that is a reflection of I think some of the rulings that we've seen out of this court in the past that have been kind of ideologically dubious or poorly argued. So I don't think that we have any obligation to. I mean, you don't give the culture warriors the benefit of the doubt. That's fine. I don't think we have any obligation to give the Supreme Court the benefit of the doubt either. I think that we should be operating in a space where we give nobody the benefit of the doubt at any time,
Yep.
and we try to make our best understanding of the world around us, given the evidence that we have. So I don't rush to the court's defense here, because I think that some of the previous stuff that we've seen out of the court, and I could list a couple of examples, but I can't at the moment because I've been in a car for the last 4 hours, but I could go find a couple of examples for the written dispatch where I could say, there have been cases in the past where the court's done some really sort of ideologically weird stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if the courts started using person with the vagina instead of a woman at a moment where it's become highly popular in progressive circles to cease using the word woman.
Or say things like chest feeder and
chest feeder, like all sorts of mother is now problematic in some of these circles. And I do think that the Supreme Court is not immune to those political and social pressures. So I'm not here to give the Supreme Court the benefit of the doubt. If they start using words like person with a vagina in a more politically charged context than this, that deserves being called out. That deserves mockery.
I agree. Yep. No, and for what it's worth, even though I operate from the assumption that 95% of culture war things from the outset are probably made up bullshit, I agree with your point 100% that if someone were to come up to me and just like sample size of a one question poll, do you think it's plausible the Supreme Court would seriously in a ruling use the term people with vagina in place of woman in an effort to be more inclusive? I'd go, sure. Mm-hmm. Yep, yeah. I can believe they would do that. And I would absolutely think it's stupid. I don't mind inclusive language, but I also think like in most contexts, using generally accepted terms is permissible and logical. It's interesting you said that you thought the court ruling was badly written. So I haven't read it. But in general, one of the things, and I say this as a writer and an editor, a career word guy, I normally find court rulings well written. Judges are surprisingly good writers, I find, on balance.
Oftentimes, and sometimes they're hilariously good writers.
Every once
in a while, you get a court ruling where you can just tell somebody's having fun today,
or someone has hit their limit.
Yeah, exactly. Like those are great, or they're just peak passive aggressive, right? They're sometimes great. Like I said, I don't think this was poorly written in the sense that it was technically poorly written. It just wasn't clear. It was a fairly simple issue to litigate, and it wasn't clearly explained. I had to go off and read a couple of these paragraphs several times to wrap my head around them. And I've got, not to toot my own horn, but I've got pretty high reading comprehension. So
you're at like grade 12 level at least.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm smart. I'm smart. I'm smartest.
SMR.
So, if someone like me is struggling to wrap a noodle around your court ruling, I can see how it would be pretty reasonable to confuse people. So, I don't think that court rulings should be accessible only to people with law degrees. I think a typical court read, it's not say that I, who doesn't have a law degree, am going to understand 100% of all the jargon all the time. But generally speaking, court rulings should be mostly understandable to the averagely intelligent person, to the averagely intelligent person. Yeah, the ordinarily intelligent person. That is the level that you're generally aiming for with a court ruling, and legislation as well.
I love you, but I just revised my comprehension estimate for you down a grade.
Thank you. Well, that's reasonable.
Averagely intelligent. Boom! I'm busting you down to grade 11.
Ordinarily smart, sorta.
Where did you have lunch again? You were extolling the virtues of this place.
Oh, the Donut Mill. The Donut Mill is an absolute institution that exists between Calgary and Edmonton. And
I've made the drive. I don't remember stopping there. So
no, if you have to stop at the Donut Mill. It's probably, I'm not giving you a word of lie, it's my favorite restaurant on earth because it's exactly the food you want to eat after being in a car for an hour and a half.
So you are sleep deprived, hungover, and currently cruising on a belly full of donuts.
I'm at best averagely intelligent. But can I just point out, like, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for making this, but it is classic white people food. It is the peak of our culture. It is You are going to go there and you are going to have a BLT with real cheddar on an ordinary piece of bread. And it's not, there's no hipster shit. Nothing's changed since 1994 when this place opened. The donuts are made fresh in house and they make thousands of these things, I'm sure, every single day because this place is so popular. But they're not like super sweet hipster donuts. They're just a little sweet, so you can actually eat one and not feel gross. Like you can eat one and then go drive without feeling like you want to throw up. They're not like Krispy Kremes. It's glorious. Everybody loves. If you live in Alberta, you know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. You stop at the donut mill every time you pass Red Deer and you bring home a dozen donuts because they're so good.
Do they have pies covered by plastic like covers, and then you can get pie by the slice?
Yeah, not pies, but they do have some really amazing Boston cream eclairs covered with the plastic covers.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I sent you some pictures of the donut mill. The donut mill must never change and it must never be franchised. It's perfect. It is a perfect thing in and of itself. And if you were ever passing through Red Deer, you will go to the donut mill and you will thank me for it. It reminds me of classic home cooked comfort
Donuts?
food, middle class classic comfort food. You know what I mean? It's awesome. And oh, they had homemade stew today. The stew, I swear, I could pave a road, but it was awesome. It was so good.
Donuts the way Mom used to make.
Donuts the way Mom used to make. No, I said it's a thing of beauty. It must be captured in crystal and be protected for all time, exactly as it is.
Is this a safe space?
This is a safe space.
Don't like donuts.
Oh, well, you would like these donuts.
I don't hate donuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will not turn down a donut, but like people love donuts. Donuts to me are like not in the top 5 baked goods that you would get.
You would feel differently about Donut Mill donuts. Donut Mill donuts are...
How far from Calgary?
It's an hour and a half drive.
See, when I'm there next month, I'm not driving an hour and a half.
You're not driving an hour and a half for Donut Mills. And also there's something
Can someone bring in a donut for me?
Yeah, I could bring you in a donut. We'll see.
No, don't drive an hour and a half. Do they deliver them anywhere in Calgary?
No, they don't. But if I'm driving up to Edmonton to our event, then I'll bring a donut for you. That's fine. Anyway, maybe I'll bring a donut for everybody who comes to our event. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. All
right. You know what we should do?
What should we do?
Well, first of all, you should like and subscribe. We should clip this part of the video and send it to them and get them to sponsor us.
No, they don't think they don't sponsor.
Well, it's worth a shot. Okay. So, even if they just sponsor us in donuts. My hometown. Not talking about donuts this week. And this is actually an interesting natural extension of what we were just talking about there, about most issues are bullshit. Mm-hmm. Right? Most culture wars. Well,
except for the issues you care about.
Well, I was going to say, like, most issues are bullshit is a little existential even for me. I'm going to rephrase that. Most culture war issues are bullshit.
Okay.
It is someone grabbing the global grifting culture war machine will take like a rural alderman from Idaho and find that they said something stupid and clip it and blast it to 400 million people across the entire free world. And that's not how human beings are meant to live. And I think as the media has collapsed and all media has become national and now it's becoming global, people, like, there has got to be a tolerance in human society for small, meaningless people. No offense, you all have the spark of God, but like some random civil servant in a community that no one has ever heard of except for the 400 people that live there should not become global international avatars of an entire political movement like that. Mm-hmm. And we're bad at that because imagine people with vaginas had been a city councilor in Des Moines. Everybody from Australia to Poland would hear about it in a day because like the Daily Mail would pick it up, or the reverse, right? Like someone would put up a sign on like a community on like, a theater on a rural campus. And I'm picking on, I'm going to go to, I picked on a red state already. So this one will be Oregon. It's like, to correct her for historic racial injustice, this show is free for black guests and everyone else must pay $10. Shit like that happens all the time. We hear about it. Instead of being the decision of a drama troupe in like small town Oregon, that becomes something that's being talked about on Sky News in the UK. A few days ago, I woke up in my own hometown and saw that Toronto had gone viral.
Oh, good.
That the Toronto police had said something and that it was blowing up on the usual suspect websites for culture war stuff. And my default assumption was that somebody had clipped something wildly out of context and Piers Morgan was going to devote his next show to it. And I went back and I actually found the original news report from City News Toronto, and it was last month, and I realized it was right. The quote was being portrayed accurately and faithfully. In the written dispatch, obviously, I'll get the exact wording right. I could copy and paste it right from the column I wrote this week. But at a community public safety event in Toronto, in Etobicoke, which is the northwestern part of the city, more like for readers who are not familiar with Toronto has like the dense downtown core that looks like Manhattan, but then it's surrounded by parts of the city that are still in Toronto but look like suburbs. Big wide streets, lots of houses. Etobicoke is one of those more suburban areas of the city. And at a public safety meeting attended by like a few dozen citizens, a cop had been asked about a rash of auto thefts in the area. The line is written about this already. It's being widely covered in the news. Auto thefts have exploded in Toronto over the last 5 years, up like 300% or something. I don't have firm stats on this, but the Toronto police have also said home invasions and break-ins to enable auto thefts are up 400% this year. So this is like big moves in small numbers, but this is bothering, like this is alarming people. So, I mean, like just at the hockey rink, like myself and the other hockey moms and dads are talking about it. This is water cooler conversation in Toronto these days. And last month, a constable for the Toronto Police Service at one of these events advised the public, like he's up there at the table at the meeting, and he said to the audience, leave your key fob by your front door so that when your door gets kicked in, it's right there and these guys can just grab it and go. And they have no reason to come any further into your house. And the cop said, these guys are armed. They have loaded guns. You do not want to give them any reason to come further into your house because you might get hurt. And I thought about that for a minute.
I mean, if that's the argument, why not just leave the key outside the door?
You've been in Edmonton. Have you read my column?
I only read the first little top half.
I actually propose just getting a box, putting your wallet into it, putting your car keys into it, putting your all your small electronics into it, and putting it on your front step at night. And just closing the door. Put your credit cards in a Ziploc bag with a post-it inside with your pins on it.
Maybe
and then if it doesn't,
leave a cookie. Leave a cookie and a little carrot like for Santa.
When Santa comes, yep. And the criminal can leave me a half-eaten cookie and a little bit of eggnog.
Thanks so much.
And yeah, no, you're right, Jen. You're completely right. Like, why go through the hassle of having to replace your front door when I can just leave all my valuables outside? Sure. Something you and I have talked about.
I mean, really, why? I mean, why lock your door? Why would you bother to lock your door then? There's no point. If a person wants to come into your door, the lock's not going to stop them. You're just embracing potential damage to your door. So just leave the key right there next to your unlocked door, and then if somebody wants to come into the door and steal the key, they're not going to bother you.
Or I just said, if we want to cut out the middleman entirely, just leave your car idling overnight with the keys in, the fob in, and the driver's side.
And then no one would ever get hurt because there's no reason to knock down the door at all.
So something I want to update. And I've already updated the column on the website. I've put a note into this effect. So something happened, and this will have happened to you before I published my column, but after I started writing it, the Toronto police put out a statement, and I missed it. So it was not in my column. I have now updated the column to include a link to the statement. And I'm encouraging anyone who had read my column but has not seen the update, go check it out. The link's at the bottom. It will take you to the Toronto police statement. What they said was, first of all, really interesting. First of all, they say, actually, that was not the best advice. Well-intentioned, but it wasn't the best advice. Here are some other things you can do to kind of make your home safer against home invasion. And it's all good advice. It's like, outdoor lights, have a security system, put like a transparent film on your windows so people can't punch through them, have good locks, have a multi-point locking device. This is all really
How
good
about
advice.
we dig a little hole, and then we put some leaves on top of the
And
hole
some spikes on the bottom.
and some spikes on the
And
bottom,
we
so that
rub
when
like human
and then
excrement on
we'll
it to
put
create infections, just like
and
guerrilla war.
we'll put the keys in the box, then we'll put them in the middle like a bait, and then when the robbers
Yeah.
come up, they'll fall in the hole.
I felt bad that I published something without having noticed the statement. And it was just a quirk of timing. I started writing it. I sent it off to one of our colleagues to edit it, and we published it. And I had not seen that statement. But nothing in that statement would have changed my thesis. I just would have noted it to be a completist. And that's why I'm noting it now.
Fair.
Everything in that Toronto police statement is good advice. It is all good advice on how to burglar proof your house, right? And that's fine. But at the same time, the vibe, the collective message here is that you're on your own.
Yeah.
That the Toronto police knows full well that there's a problem here. And instead of saying, we've got every available man on this, we're going to put a cop on every corner, or we're doubling patrols in these priority neighborhoods, what they're saying is, leave your keys by the door, and here's a list of things you can do to make it harder to break into your house. And I don't mind that message, but I don't like it in isolation. Like, it feels to me that the largest municipal police force in this country has identified its purpose is basically to be an information service. Here are best practices of how to prevent you from being a victim of a home invasion here. And context is everything. Context is king. Because this is happening against the backdrop of how many times have you and I talked about this? Rail blockades throughout the teens and early 2020s. The convoy at the borders and in Ottawa. And as we have written about a lot in recent months, protests largely in Toronto and Montreal related to the war in the Middle East. And the overwhelming message is that the cops are just not in control. And since I wrote the column, I've got a lot of messages from mostly retired law enforcement, actually. Not a lot of serving. Cops generally don't message journalists. That's fine. I get it. But a lot of them are like, Matt, you can't blame us for this. The politicians have tied our hands. The courts would, anyone we arrest, the courts are just going to let out. And Jen, I agree with that. Like, I get it. I understand revolving door bail. That's a huge problem we have in Toronto. I understand, particularly in the context of those Gaza protests, that Olivia Chow and Doug Ford don't want any heads getting cracked at a rally because then they're going to have to be seen to be taken aside. I get it.
Yeah.
But cops got a cop. Police got a police. Like, I might have intellectual sympathy for why anyone wants to explain to me how hard it is for cops to do their job these days. But I cannot go from that intellectual sympathy and understanding to, well, I guess that's that.
Well, and then
we just need him to cop.
The other thing I would point out is, if you want to see what a world without uniform policing looks like, which is where we're devolving to, what that actually leads to is wealthy communities banding together to create their own private security forces.
It's happening in Toronto already. And that's something.
And that's so it's going to lead to gated communities, which has significant social cohesion problems when you're dealing with class divisions, which aren't typically sorts of major dividers in Canada, but are increasingly going to be. So you're dealing with gated communities. You're going to deal with wealthier communities hiring private security in their respective places, and you're going to have not even unequal access to justice, which is always an issue when you're dealing with socioeconomic class. You're going to have unequal access to policing. So the more dangerous neighborhoods that are more prone to violence and crime as a result of various socioeconomic factors are only going to become more and more and more and more dangerous, because these are not the communities that are going to be able to police themselves. They're going to be relying on, essentially it becomes the equivalent of two-tier healthcare, except it's two-tier public safety, right? And
it's already happening.
It's already happening.
And there are a few neighborhoods in Toronto that I know of that are not being publicly named yet because, frankly, they're embarrassed by their privilege. But there are neighborhoods in Toronto where the local residents, either on an ad hoc basis or through existing neighborhood associations, have pooled money, and it's a couple bucks a month per house, rounding error on these budgets, and they have hired private security forces to function as night watchmen.
Well, and I'll tell you that was actually what happened in London, and that's why now we have municipal policing today, because it was the rich areas in London that were able to afford security on their streets, and it was the early municipal policing acts. What was it called? Oh God,
Peel Commission.
Sorry, thank you. Peel Commission that created the civilian London Metropolitan Police, which was supposed to be very distinct from a militia or a crown ordered military force, right? But this was supposed to give equal access to safe streets, effectively, regardless of what your socioeconomic status was. So the decline of that is a real, to me, that's a real civilizational backsliding problem.
Yeah.
And it's also what leads us to what you see in a lot of United States communities, which is, of course, the gated community, right? Wealthier people live in a totally different kind of United States than non-wealthy people, and it creates massive inequalities and inefficiencies in the system, but also it destroys class mobility, right? Because it means that poorer people are no longer intermingling with wealthier people, and then you don't get the network. The network effects start to break down, and it just destroys class mobility.
In the written dispatch, I'll include a link to it, but I've already tweeted out. I totally fell off the not tweeting wagon this week. I gotta get clean again. But I was so torqued about this, I was tweeting up a storm, and that was my bad. I'm getting back on the wagon. But one of the things I tweeted was a CTV News Toronto story interviewing residents of a local community in Toronto who have pooled money to have security guards in a marked security vehicle patrolling their streets at night. And the news article treated it almost as, and I'm not saying this critically of the reporter, but it was treated as a novelty. Hey, look at this new thing that some Toronto residents are doing to adapt to the car thefts in their neighborhood. It's not a novelty. It's a return to the historical mean.
Yeah, that is. That's
and
true.
If you know your history, and I've read a history book or two, human beings throughout all known civilizations have prioritized as one of the first things they build in the village. They build a temple, a granary, and then they figure out some kind of security force. And there's about a billion varieties of this. It could be tribal. It could be like some sort of tribal justice where an elder rules and then the tribe carries out the ruling. They don't need a separate muscle. They don't need like an armed force to do it. It could be religious courts functioning again using the power of moral suasion, even right up to stoning somebody to death. But the authority was vested in either a tribal or religious leader. You have mercenaries being used throughout history. You have centralized criminal organizations, absolutely, to this day. Yeah. Gangs throughout the world today operate as a kind of street level and guarantor of security. And, there have been the king's army being sent in to push the bandits back from the village. People do not settle for insecure existences. They find security where they can find it. And throughout human history, that's God and religion, the tribe, the king, the military, or as you say, criminal organizations. And
protection rackets, basically street level protection rackets. And the rich communities are going to be able to put together nice, glossy private security, and the poor communities are going to have to deal with protection rackets.
That's where this goes. I remember, this is many years ago, this is when I still had hair. I used to go to a great Italian barbershop in where I grew up. And the guys there, as the Italian barbershop might have hinted, were Italian. They were Italian immigrants. And there had been some bust in the news. Some mob guy had been busted in Toronto, and like the barbershop had like a TV mounted up on the ceiling, very, very stereotypical. And the guy was basically going, when I grew up, we lived in terror of these guys, right? Like these guys had the nice suits and the nice cars, and he said he was from Sicily. And he goes, we lived in terror of these guys, but. And I thought, I'm sitting in the chair. I got hot towels all over my face. I'm thinking this is going to be a really interesting but. The guy says, when we found out, more like when his parents did, that there was a creep in the neighborhood who was, he said, touching the kids. That's how the barber described it. Who do you think took care of that? The mob did. And all these people who were terrified of the mob were suddenly glad that they were there. And I remember thinking at the time,
just look, we're not making an argument for mob rule. We're not
we're
making
not.
an argument for the mob.
We're making the opposite argument.
We're making the opposite argument.
The argument.
Not the non-mob argument.
Yeah. But the police, like you said a minute ago, we're moving into the era of not having like civilian uniform police. That's actually, the weird thing is we're not moving into that era. We're moving into the era of having lavishly funded, equipped, well-trained uniformed police who don't police.
Right.
And like it's like quiet quitting for law enforcement. And what's really interesting about this one, so I published this column yesterday. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and it has been from left to right. And it seems to me we might be heading towards some sort of pan-partisan consensus that no one is happy with policing right now. Now, I don't know how long that consensus survives an actual debate about how to fix it. I suspect not long. But I was talking just with a buddy today, a friend of the line, who we were talking about, and he made the really interesting point. He goes, right now, you could probably forge an alliance between militant cyclists and militant Zionists in Toronto, because they would agree that the Toronto police are fucking up and not serving their communities. And I just like, he's right.
Well, can I make one observation here? Because as I said, I just got back from Edmonton. I was doing a media panel for the Alberta Chamber of Commerce.
How'd that go?
It was great fun. Actually, I had a great time. It was super good. It's Chatham House rules, so I can't talk about it very much. But
everybody loves a visit Edmonton.
Everybody loves a visit. Well, and I mean, you don't want to sound ungrateful to the host city, because I quite like Edmonton and had a great time. But wow, it's gotten worse from the last time I was there. Even
how?
Like
I don't know what you
noticeably
mean.
Worse. I was walking around downtown Edmonton, middle of the day. There's open drug use everywhere.
Oh,
everywhere.
Interesting.
Just every single block, it's not like it's confined to one little problem area. I mean, it's everywhere downtown.
Do you know?
I noticed
you lived in Toronto. How long did you live in Toronto for?
Oh, 6 years, 7 years.
St. Lawrence Market. I'm sure you've been there.
Yeah.
I was at St. Lawrence Market less than a week ago, and there's a parking garage like 400 feet from St. Lawrence Market, and St. Lawrence Market's cops all around it. And I was walking back to my car with my wife and my son. My daughter was at a friend's, and you could almost feel yourself passing out of the market bubble of protection. And in the time it took us to get from the market to the parking garage, for the Toronto listeners and viewers here who will know that Green Pea parking garage just south of it, there was a crazy dude pounding a mailbox to pieces.
Well, and the thing I would notice about what was happening in Edmonton as well, is there are a couple other things. One, cops everywhere. The police presence was, you could not go one step in any direction without seeing a police or private security anywhere, as far as I could tell. The other thing I noticed as I went into the main mall area at downtown, half those stores are closed. Half the mall's dead, completely shut down. And the remaining stores are the really down market, cheap and cheerful winners type stores. That's very different than, I think I used to go to Edmonton quite frequently about 10 years ago. It's noticeably declined in the last couple of years. I mean, I had a chat with my friend Colby, who lives downtown, and he was talking about the crime in his area, and it's just, there was a couple homicides around the corner from him. Like it's just become a very normal part of downtown life. So it's something to see. I think the downtown, to some degrees, is hollowing out in a really weird and creepy way.
People move into the suburbs if they can afford it.
They're not going downtown, because you wouldn't. I wasn't bothered at any point. Nobody bothered me. I could walk around and I was safe, but I wouldn't. But I was also walking around in the middle of the day on like a Thursday. And there were open patrols of uniformed police everywhere.
Were they doing anything, or were they just keeping an eye on things?
Just keeping an eye. And very clearly people who were inebriated everywhere. Like that just you take for granted. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the Vancouver downtown east side. It wasn't as bad as some of those terrible trank videos you're seeing coming out of Philadelphia. It wasn't like that. it was far more dispersed. It wasn't that condensed,
Mhm.
but the whole vibe of downtown was not good. And I would also say it's I think it's different in Calgary. There's no place in Calgary that I walk around where I notice that much open drug use, that much problems. Like you can go to any spot in Toronto, you're always going to run into homeless people, and that's a normal part of city living, right? But Edmonton's worse. Edmonton's noticeably worse, and it's gotten worse.
This
So
is, I want to ask a question here in ignorance of Alberta, but my understanding is that typically Edmonton, relative to Calgary and Edmonton, Edmonton's been the rougher city.
yeah, Edmonton is there's always has been the rougher city, no question. There's more money in Calgary. People are wealthier.
It's the like Edmonton's a government and army town, and Calgary's the business,
Yeah,
right?
Edmonton's kind of government union. It's a bit more working class town.
Yeah.
And it's actually got its upsides as a result of that. It's kind of got a cool art scene. It's got a couple cool areas. Edmonton's not a bad city. I mean, I'm a Calgarian, so I'm going to trash it because I have to. It's
It's like my
necessary.
reflexive Hamilton bashing. It's just
Yeah,
mandatory.
correct. It's baked in. You have to take it for what it's worth. But no, Calgary's always been a more the white collar or professional class richer city. And the crime issues I don't think have ever been as bad in Calgary. So
Yeah, and so the listeners don't think I'm wildly ignorant. Like I have been to both cities, but like I don't have the local street eye vibe of it.
yeah, well, you will because we are going to be holding an event in Edmonton in June. So we'll see if we this podcast pisses off enough people that they'll be protesting us at the doors.
Who,
So
us?
could happen.
Anyway, no,
Um,
no. I mean, the only closing thought I'd have on the cop thing, and you've touched on this, is none of this stuff is new, right? And
it's not.
this is just like my expectations are a problem thesis writ large. And I wrote this in the column. Thousands of years of human history, we have figured out lots of ways that people will make their community secure. We'll build walls around the village, and all boys between 10 and 15 shall man the gates, right? Like we every Englishman a longbowman, right? Like there have been all these things throughout history where we figure out ways to keep the bandits and the barbarians away. And 200 years ago, we came up with something new: a professional, civilian, independent law enforcement agency that would investigate crimes, provide public order, and make arrests, and an independent, neutral, evidence-based court system that was separate from this organization. Almost every Canadian alive today has grown up under that system. It's only 200 years old, and we seem to
Mhm.
be tired of it already.
Mm.
So how many, I was thinking, you mentioned gated communities. It's very easy to build a gated community if you're starting from scratch as a subdivision.
Mhm.
I don't know how the hell we'd make Leaside gated. Like, what are we going to do? Put sandbags down Eglinton Avenue? Like, it's not going to work. But
Well,
what could
there's a
have been?
couple. The other thing that happens also as well is you get this an extreme form of NIMBYism, and we've seen this in Calgary, for example,
Oh,
where I mean Calgary's really bad for this, but just really obnoxious. But you get communities wanting to cut themselves off from transit access
mm-hmm,
is often how that kind of gated community
mm-hmm.
vibe starts to go. It's like, no, we don't want the buses coming to our communities. We don't want the CRC train coming to the community. We don't
They
want the
ride
subtrain
them.
coming to community because that brings in poor people
Yeah.
who are a risk to us.
Yeah,
The
we have
further away
cars.
you are, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The rich people have cars, and we don't trust that the riffraff will be let in on these communities. I mean, this take goes to a really ugly, very, very classist place very quickly. But it is a reflection of if people don't feel safe using your transit, then they're not going to want transit in their communities.
Mm-hmm.
They have to feel as if they themselves could use that transit and feel comfortable and safe on it.
Or else it's a riffraff
Otherwise,
conveyor device.
that's how people are going to view it. And I'm not saying that that's correct. However, if you can't keep your transit system clean, safe, affordable, and used by people across the socioeconomic spectrum, then it's not going to be welcomed by people across the socioeconomic spectrum, and ultimately it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yeah.
because it's not going to be financially supported by people across the socioeconomic spectrum.
You can't really install gates on existing neighborhood grids in large established cities like Toronto. So what I think we'll see more of, and I think we're seeing it already. And again, in the written dispatch, the link will be there. We are seeing the emergence of private security forces to fill the gap that the police are unable or unwilling to do.
Like and subscribe to the line. Join our gated community. I do want to talk a little bit about Alberta because we've had a fun week in Alberta. Alberta. So for those who are not aware, of course, the last election, the UCP, led by Danielle Smith, won a majority government, not a huge majority government, but a healthy majority government. Afterwards, we had fairly recently the leader of the NDP, former Premier Rachel Notley, announced that she would be stepping down leadership and passing the torch on. Notley, to her credit, built the NDP from an absolute fringe party to government. And she did that by being a highly charismatic, highly likable leader who was seen to be a credible alternative to, at that point, 44 years of conservative rule in this province. And as a result, she is stepping down, and it has been a leadership race. And I'll be honest with you, I've been watching the leadership race, but I haven't been invested in it. So I think the front runners on this one are definitely two NDP MLAs. Kathleen Ganley and Sarah Hoffman are the two kind of top runners. Raki Patchouli is another name that keeps coming up. And of course, recently we started to hear rumors that former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi was interested in throwing his towel into the ring. Now, Naheed Nenshi was doing a contract with CBC, a Canada Reads contract with CBC, which ran out on March 9th, I understand. So he was not at liberty to announce anything until this week. And lo and behold, March 9th came and went. And then the Monday after March 9th came and went. And what did we get? We got an announcement that Naheed Nenshi will, in fact, be running for leadership of the NDP. Now, I'm going to get into the technical analysis of this in just a moment, whether or not he can win and why, all of that. However, there's a couple of things that were very notable during his launch. Firstly, he did an online-only launch, which I thought was really interesting. Normally, when people make leadership announcements of this kind, they fill a room with supporters and then they come out and give a speech.
And there's balloons and posters and matching T-shirts and yeah.
Now, he did do an in-person event later in the week, but his actual launch was just on his website, nenshi.ca.
Did he get a donut sponsor?
I don't think he got a donut sponsor. Oh. And it was launched with essentially a very online-only mindset, which, if you know a little bit about Nenshi's rise to fame back in 2010, tracks. He was very much a guy who rode a wave of the burgeoning power of Twitter in the 1910s or the 2010s, and was a very online candidate who managed to take that online energy into
Remember then when Twitter mattered.
So anyway, it kind of makes sense that he started with an online only campaign here. However, it was a little, I did raise my eyebrow. A couple things that also raised my eyebrow when he launched is that he started with this motherhood apple pie statement about, I believe in public services, I believe in education, I believe in good health care. I mean, sure, so do we all. I mean, everybody believes in these things. So it was very moderate centrist type of approach. But it was very, very light on policy. It wasn't clear what policies he was putting forward. And I think that that's going to be interesting when you compare him to some of his competitors in this race. The other thing is that some of the language that he was using was very emotionally loaded. So he accused Danielle Smith of being like immoral and dangerous. Okay, so that kind of caught my eye a little bit.
And what it's worth, that made national news. Like that was not a flash in the pan Alberta story. That was my headlines.
Absolutely. And also Naheed Nenshi has national profile. Mm-hmm. So, an Alberta NDP leadership race is not really that interesting until someone with that kind of profile steps into it. And now I'm kind of strapped in because now I'm like, all right, now I'm interested. Now I'm going to see where this goes.
His name had floated around as theoretical possible successors to Justin Trudeau as federal Liberal leader. Well,
Matt, I'm going to read you something. Because not that she followed up this online-only launch by doing a media blitz, going on a bunch of mainstream medias. We've asked Nenshi if he would like to, or his people, if he'd like to do an On the Line podcast with us here at The Line. We'd love to have him. It would be great to chat with him. But of course, we're not top priority for obvious reasons, But he did do an interview with Rick Bell, who's a well-known post-media columnist.
Yep.
And he was very candid with Rick Bell. I'm going to read you 2 quotes, okay? 2 quotes. And I'm just pulling them up right here.
And this is Nenshi to Bell.
This is Nenshi to Bell. Okay. So there's 2 ones. I'm going to do both in turn here. So I'm just going to go down here. So referencing a previous column, Bell said something it was quoting someone from inside the premier's office who said, "Look, we're just super pleased by the idea of a Nenshi-led NDP. Quote, running against him would present us with the mother of target-rich environments." Nenshi responds to this in this column with Bell by saying something to the effect of, I'm just going to point out here. I'm going to pull it up.
And sorry, Jen, right. While you find it, this is Bell interviewing Nenshi directly? Yeah. Like it's a conversation?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. This is a conversation. So there's 2 quotes that come out of this sort of mother of all target-rich environments quip. And I think what happened is Bell quoted that quote to Nenshi, and this was Nenshi's response. Quote, "Former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein used the term, quote, the mother of all battles. Quote, they think at this point in the world when civilians are being killed in conflicts around the world, their use of the Saddam Hussein phrase, mother of ... followed by, quote, target-rich environments which in military parlance means full of civilians to kill. That actually tells you a lot about their mindset and how they run Alberta." That. Your response.
How hard are you trying to get him on the podcast?
I mean, if he wants to come, he can come, but I think that we should always be candid in our opinion about this sort of thing.
That's a fucking stupid thing to say.
Okay, why? Why do you think it's a stupid thing to say?
The idea that the mother of is somehow intrinsically a Saddam Hussein reference, like necessity is the mother of invention. Oh, guess what? I just endorsed gassing the Kurds. Fuck off. Like that's not a serious reply. And you and I have been sorry, Nahid. I probably shouldn't have said fuck off. We're trying to book you on the show, but that's ridiculous. And like you and I have been talking about the hysterical back and forth we've been seeing lately. Do you remember it was Randy Boissonnault, the Liberal cabinet minister,
Boissonnault, yeah,
who went from basically going, was it Daniel Smith said like they should
Daniel Smith said something like, "I wish you would have Stephen Guilbeault in your sights, in your crosshairs." Yeah, that's right.
And then Randy Boissonnault was like, "Oh, it's militarized language." And then the next week, and we noted this
literally the next week,
it's our Article 5 moment.
We had to invoke the Article 5. This is the gays NATO. We have to invoke Article 5 against Danielle Smith and her trans policies,
and release the gay tactical nuclear weapons. Militarized metaphors are okay or they aren't.
Yeah, that's right.
I vote for okay, personally, because I think they fit, and most of them are in common parlance anyway. But
you can't clutch your pearls one week and then use a militarized metaphor the next.
Look, I'm a couple time zones away from you guys, but it seems to me that if you want to take on Danielle Smith and defeat her in the next election, you don't need to reach for Operation Iraqi Freedom.
So here that brings me to the second response.
Oh, and first of all, may I just also add, target-rich environment does not refer to civilians. It refers to enemy assets like tanks and ships.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Mr. Military Historian. I think that is actually correct now that you mention it, but also makes his response to this quote all the funnier. So I will go back to the second quote from this Bell piece, and again, I'll link this in the show description notes below. Okay. Quote, "They're scared. They're terrified," says Nenshi. "How awesome is it that they're so scared? I love it. I've gotten under their skin already. Obviously, Danielle Smith knows I've known her for 30 years. I know everything there is to know about her. I know how to get under her skin in a way that other candidates don't. I love they're so scared."
The former Calgary mayor then added, and she's not invited to my birthday party. Like, what? Here's the thing. And again, this is me from 2 time zones away. Now,
Okay.
he mentioned is a credible profile. He's a respected guy.
Yes.
People, I've interviewed him. It was a long time ago now. I thought he was perfectly pleasant. I thought he was smart. I was impressed by him.
Very smart. Yep.
What you're
Again, would love to have him on the show.
Would we? Jen certainly would. You know what? No, all kidding aside, I would love for him to come on, and we could talk the 1991 and 2003 campaigns in Iraq, because apparently that's something he's eager to talk about. One of the things that I refuse to do, and I have told people to their face or directly in writing that I will not do this, is I refuse to accept that they're as stupid as they're pretending they're being, because I know them too well. Or I know them at least by reputation. And I'll say to them sometimes, nah, you're smarter than you're acting right now, and I'm not going to engage with you on this level. I don't know Naheed Nenshi. I don't. I've interviewed him. Met him once, that I can recall. But he's smarter than either of those comments.
Okay, so here's where I walk away from all this.
Oh, can I add one thing?
Yes.
It is interesting to me that among his opening moves would be doing stuff like this, unless, is Rick Bell a reliable conduit to Danielle Smith?
Oh, I think Rick Bell is definitely on the conservative side.
But I mean, is that someone that Smith or people around her will read?
Yes.
Is it possible that this is just psychological warfare?
Yes.
So Nenshi will show up at all the other like economic club luncheons and whatnot and talk about like green prosperity and building a better Alberta. Yeah. But when talking specifically to conservative columnists, he's going to go, nyeh, 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 root.
Yes, absolutely. That's totally a possibility as to what the strategy is here.
Okay.
However, I would make a couple of observations. One, a mistake that I commonly see in Alberta politics from leaders of all stripes, left and right, is that they constantly surround themselves with people who are too like them. They don't surround themselves with people who are willing to be the guy in the room who's like, stop for a minute.
Yeah, you and I would never do that.
Well, we'd never run for politics because that's a different set of problems. I think that Nenshi does not have a woman in his room. And I think he needs a woman in his room. I don't mean that in an appropriate way. I mean the campaign war room.
You know what? You're right, and that wouldn't have occurred to me until the moment you brought it up. And you know why? You know why I now realize exactly what you're saying? Because a woman told me. I would never have occurred to me that the way he was talking about a female leader was going to alienate women voters until a woman brought it up. Because you know what? Because I'm a dude.
Yep. And can I also point out that I believe that the bulk of the NDP membership to date is female?
No.
And I'm also going to point out that he's running against 2 frontrunners named Sarah Hoffman and Kathleen Ganley, who are not only female, they're not wilting flower females. They're like fuck off and die females. So if he thinks that...
My favorite kind.
Well, they were more fun. But if he thinks that he's going to walk into a room with these women and they're going to... by his presence, I think he's got another thing coming. And if he thinks that he's going to walk into a room with these women and he's smarter than them, he's going to find he's got another thing coming. So
I just want to insert one thing, Jen, here. I think what you meant to say is they are fuck off and die people with vaginas.
Correct. They're fuck off and die people with vaginas.
As per the Supreme Court of
and I say that with the utmost respect and in the most complimentary of terms. So he's got those issues I think that he's going to have to resolve, which isn't to say that he can't win. So here's then what I get into the technical analysis of this. What does Nenshi need to do to win here? Because I don't know exactly what the NDP's membership list is.
Do you mean win the leadership or become the premier?
No, I mean win the leadership. Become the premier, that's a different game.
Yeah,
that's a future game, right? I'm talking win the leadership. I don't know what the NDP's state of their current list is. I've heard rumors of how many active members they have on that list. I don't know how many active versus non-active members they have on their list. And I don't know who has access to their membership list. Okay? So I'm presuming that Ganley and Hoffman have access to everybody who's ever sent an NDP, Alberta, MLA, anything at any time. And that those are the lists and the infrastructure that they're going to be able to use to sell memberships. And let's remember that leadership races are essentially membership drives.
Yeah.
It's about how many members you can bring into the party and how many of those people can you get to come out to you for you on voting day.
Yep.
So I think that Hoffman and Ganley already have a kind of infrastructure of access to existing or lapsed party members that they can build their membership drives off of. Which means in order to win as an outsider, Nenchi's relying on his superior name recognition and name ID, which he absolutely has. But he's going to need to sell some number of brand new NDP memberships, bring those new people into the party, and get them to vote for him. What is that number? I mean, my guess, my absolute back of the napkin guess is 15 to 20,000 new memberships. I think he's going to need to sell about that in order to win. But also remember, it's going to be a ranked ballot, which means I think there's a pretty good chance that he needs to not only win, but he needs to win on the first ballot in order to really have a shot. So he needs to get like the 50% on ballot one. Otherwise, all of the other pre-existing insider candidates are going to line up probably behind Sarah Hoffman. And there's a good chance he'll get shut out on a third, fourth, or fifth ballot. So can Nenchi, with his existing infrastructure, sell 10 to 20,000 members? It will be almost totally coming out of Calgary, of course, because he was mayor of Calgary. I have to presume he has some existing active lists of supporters in Calgary. What are his supports like in urban center Calgary versus rural or suburban Calgary? I don't know. He did not leave on a high note. He wasn't the most popular dude after the end of his last term, as most political figures aren't near the end of their term. He was mayor for 10 years, right, to 11 years. So, you wouldn't necessarily expect him to be super popular at the end of the term. That's normal. But I don't know what his existing infrastructure is. I don't know what his existing popularity is. And I don't know if he can recreate the wave of 2010 in an environment in which the internet environment in which he's trying to build that wave has radically changed from 2010. I'm also not convinced that he's maintained a lot of his existing political infrastructure in the way that he needs to in order to dominate this race from the outside. So look, I don't rule out the possibility that this is going to be a coronation and Nenchi could win on the first ballot. Absolutely, that could happen. But I also don't rule out the possibility that he totally washes out here. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the first debate goes. I'm going to be watching that first and second debate because I think that's going to tell us a lot about the degree to which he can moderate and work with people in this party. I mean, the other observation, and many other people have made it, is that municipal politics and party provincial politics and party partisan politics, very different beasts. Trying to win a municipal race in Calgary is a radically different monster than trying to win a leadership race and then build and maintain and coalesce support of a fractious caucus, which involves a lot of really thankless work. So I don't know if he has that particular skill set. And the other thing too that I would observe about all of this is, how should I say this? I don't know what's motivating him here. I don't know what's motivating him to run. I understand why Sarah Hoffman wants to be leader. I think that's very clear to me. I can understand why Danielle Smith is premier. She loves being premier. You can tell, that she radiates glee. She loves campaigning. She loves sitting down to talk to people. She loves going on the radio. She loves being busy. Danielle Smith was born to be premier. Yep. She loves that shit. And you can feel that off of her.
That all sounds terrible, but I mean, yeah, go on.
The terrible to us. Great. No, that sounds like a monstrous disaster for people like us. But for her, she loves it. I don't struggle to understand what her motivations are. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's motivating Naheed Nenchi. That's kind of why I want to get him on the show. I want to understand what's actually motivating him here. Because he can go out and be like, I love Calgary. I love the education system. This person made me who I am, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't tell me anything about what's motivating you up here. Right? And that's what I need to see from him.
He's motivated to liberate the people of Kuwait. He's got to drive out Danielle Smith's Republican Guard divisions. And
he's going to topple her statue.
Yeah. By the way, just as a
Operation Enduring Freedom.
Well, as a correction to the record, I would like to say I referred to Iraqi freedom earlier. Pardon me. The Mother of All Battle reference was not from 2003. It was from 1991, which was Desert Storm.
Oh, even better. So anyway, that's all I have to say about this right now. Like and subscribe to the line. I'm now very strapped into this leadership contest. I'm very invested in it. I'm fascinated. I'm here for it.
I've got you're strapped in like a fighter pilot strafing villages full of civilians, Jen.
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
Just like that.
You're gonna go bomb some villages, like
personally from my computer. I'm gonna go bomb some villages.
You actually can do that now.
Oh, good to know.
I mean, not you. Like, it's not like you can sign up for a website.
They don't give that power to me directly, but
yet.
Wait till we get into the year 2043 with our private police force, and you just watch what I can do.
That'll be part of revised online harms. The actual drone strikes will be. They're going to wait. They're going to punt that to the committee part of reviewing online harms. Anything else? I
got nothing else, but I think we're good. That was an hour. That's good.
Was it? I don't have a timer anymore.
Yeah, 1 hour and 7 minutes and 34 seconds.
Well, isn't that grand?
Once again, if you want to come and see a live podcast taping, it's just as fun as this, except in person with popcorn.
We've really put our best foot forward on this one.
We absolutely have. The Eventbrite, we're on Eventbrite to buy tickets for that. We'll put that in the show description below. Once again, thank you for DS Lawyers and our friends there. They are actually great lawyers.
Yeah.
DS Lawyers Canada LLP. There are lawyers here in Calgary. And they're fantastic. They're very responsive to us.
One day we may tell a story of just how good they are.
Just how good they are. Yeah. That we may save that one for the live podcast when the lights go off. Maybe we'll save that one. We'll save that particular story for the meet and greet after. We'll save that one for the paid meet and greet. So again, if you want to come to our paid meet and greet in Calgary, go look for that after the jump on the written dispatch, and again, that's paid subscribers only. So, and
of course, because we have no shame, anyone else in the Calgary area or Alberta generally, or anyone who would like to advertise at our event, drop us an email. You can find our contact information, but it's jen@readtheline.ca or matt@readtheline.ca. Like not hard to find us. We would love to mention you in exchange for your money.
Absolutely.
Donuts.
All right. Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.